It's 11 o'clock this morning. Welcome to this virtual Railex, the 2021 virtual Railex show, and welcome to this first of the live sessions that we are holding today. And we are welcoming the Hillingdon Railway modelers with their Grindley Brook layout. First and foremost, I would like everybody please to be muted and also to stop their videos, so that they can allow for the presentation to be full screen. Also, by stopping the video, you allow the bandwidth to not get overrun. We've got a lot of stuff running today, and we could well be that the bandwidth creates problems. So please stop your video, and if you mute, then we don't get any odd sounds from the background coming through. At this point, then, I'd like to welcome Peter Story and his colleagues from the Hillingdon Model Railway Club and their live session with creating Grindley Brook. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Rob, and good morning from London. I'd like to introduce Brian Hodgson and myself, Peter Story. We're two of the O-Gauge team at Hillingdon Railway Modelers in West London who have built this O-Gauge exhibition layout called Grindley Brook. We've been asked to do a presentation about how the layout was built by the club, and to explain this, we've divided the presentation into a number of chapters. The first one being design. So over to Brian to talk about that.
Okay. Right, I'm going to talk about the design of the layout and the reasons for getting where we got to. Our previous O-Gauge exhibition layout was East Dean and was on the exhibition circuit for about 10 years. This was a concave shape with end-to-end running, with cassettes at each end of a fiddle yard, which reluctantly sold due to insufficient storage space, and is now with the Worley Club members, but is still being exhibited. In 2005, we started thinking about building a new layout, a tail chaser, because we had so much stock that couldn't be shown on East Dean. Our inspiration at the time came from holiday haunts where you could sit and watch the trains go by. This is our original Hillingdon O-Gauge test track before we started work on Grindley Brook. The idea was to drop the new layout into one side of our test track opposite the fiddle yard. The test track had 4 boards on each straight section, so we needed to expand it. The first task was to extend the test track to have 5 boards in each straight section, as shown here. In 2006, we started to develop some plans. These were initially designed with lots of members having their say and thus failed to satisfy anyone. Originally, the plan was to have just trains running through scenery, but that was thought to be boring to operate, so a station sidings were added. Eventually, a club member came up with this drawing, which seemed to satisfy everyone. From that drawing, it was tweaked in CAD, and this drawing was made. This shows how it fits into the test track, and shows the 8 scenic boards, and plus the 4 new curve boards for point work leading into the fiddle yard. Next, to find a location. Our previous layouts were in BR Southern and BR Western regions, so for a change we opted for BR Midland region. With the PICO LNWR book to hand, which enabled us to build some structures, because it had the plans in there, we looked for an ex-LNWR double track. The line between Whitchurch and Chester fitted our requirements, and Grindley Brook looked to have some interesting features, such as a canal. So the name Grindley Brook was chosen. In this 1961 map, there's no station showing. However, we did find out subsequently that a halt did exist at one time. The halt opened in 1937 and closed in 1957. The line itself closed in 1963. And here we see the new scenic boards with the test track and fiddle yard. The new boards for the curved point work have yet to be built at this stage.
Okay, now we'll talk about baseboard construction. By 2008, work started on constructing the new baseboards. They were made from 6mm birch ply board components under construction are the cross members. This photo shows the cross beams and longitudinal supports being put together for the first time. This shows the different crossbeam sizes for the drop board where the canal section will be. That's the bottom of the picture. So by 2009, the new scenic boards were taking shape. Next, we marked where the track will go. This slide shows open board construction where the track is higher than the land. Layout is shown temporarily on East Dean's legs, as you can see from this picture. The scenic section is 32 feet long. Notice that the track bed is incomplete for the drop board, which is the second board from the right. This slide also shows the board edges for the hill and the lower board for the canal area. Our next task was to smooth out the baseboard tops to create a perfectly flat base before laying cork and then subsequently the track. We actually spent several weeks smoothing out the baseboard tops to make sure that the layout would run as smoothly as possible. Track laying then is shown here going on the canal board. Afterwards, the track bed was cut to insert the canal bridge. The track bed is now cut and canal bridge way beams are now in place for the track. Note the extra pillars to add strength, because we were concerned that once we cut that section where the bridge was going to be, we had to make sure that the two sides of the track would still stay in exactly the same place. Now works shown here to ensure that the scenic boards and the track lines up exactly with the test track boards. The next step was to paint the underside of the scenic boards white to seal the wood and to make fault finding in the electrics far easier to see. You can see here in the picture on the right is Dave Hammersley from Roxy Mouldings, and on the left is Pete Jarry, one of our club members. To increase the length of the sidings, we rebuilt the test track curves to incorporate curved points on the approach to the sidings. With that in place, each siding can now hold 2 trains each.
Yes.
The new legs for the new boards. All the new legs are interchangeable, apart from the lower ones for the canal board. Because the layout boards are curved, the pairs of legs are closer together on the inside. Therefore, different length metal braces had to be made. The legs we've been using from our previous layout East Dean was sold with that layout to the Worley Club. Here's the picture of the layout now sitting on its new legs for the first time.
Right, it's over back to Brian for the track construction. We started a track component production line and started in 2009, and there's lots, all the track was hand built, so there's a lot of cleaning up work. And here we see some people cleaning up the C&L sleepers. Sadly, the 2 members here, Ted Armstrong and Jeff Tyler, are no longer with us. The cork was laid down and track was placed on top of it, but even so, at the board joints, some levelling off was required. A club member made up the LNWR style stop blocks from scratch, which were needed for our sidings, obviously. A jig was used to bend the rails, and we tacked on some etchings for the riveted plates onto another etching that we were producing. We also designed our own track gauges. The scenic section of the track was laid at 31.5 mil rather than normal 32 mil. The outer track was laid first, then the inner track was laid using the double track gauges. These were simply made by a piece of K&S brass square tube joining the two gauges to give a uniform distance between the two running tracks, usually referred to as a 6 foot. After the cork base was laid, the sleepers were threaded with the chairs added with rails and placed on the board using cardboard spacers before gluing onto the cork. And then the second rail with the threaded chairs is positioned on the sleepers using the track gauges and fixed in place. For the turnouts, CAD drawings were printed off and laid directly onto the boards, and the track laid directly onto these. The van in the bottom there is an LNER van that has seen a lot of use, being shoved up and down the layout to see how the stock would perform through the turnouts and the track. Track work is slowly taking shape, and we start deciding where the structures are going to be placed using some cardboard mock-ups. On the left, the sidings have only just been roughly set out to see how they all look. And this shows the track work through the station area. Note that on the bottom left of the drawing where the folder is, you can see some shaded bits, and that's where the track was originally going to go. But like so many things, it looked good on the CAD, but when it came to be put on the baseboard, we thought the track needed to be slewed over a bit. And here we can see some of the stop blocks in place on the layout, and you can just make out the way beams for the canal bridge in the middle top of the picture. With the track laid and painted, this view shows the from the midpoint of the layout towards the station area. It's interesting to note there's actually 8 points on that little bit of track work. And this is the view in the opposite direction. The point rodding is now being put into place, and also note the cutout space in the cork where the goods shed is going to drop into. At each end of the layout, the track gauge widens to meet the fiddly yard tracks at either end. So the track gauge widens from 31.5 mil to 32 mil because the test track is built with standard Pico track. Also, the 6 foot track spacing widens to meet the spacing of the test track. And that's what this slide shows. For ballasting, the base goes down the sidings, but the main ballasting is for the running lines is normal ballasting. By this stage, you can see that in the bottom left, the point rodding is already in place. This shows the different ballast treatments for the main line and the sidings. In both cases, they were laid on dry, then soaked in diluted PVA. The cinders are a mixture of real cinders from discarded coal ash from the barges on the local canal, and a mixture of IKEA black sand, which is sold for flower vases. The goods shed is partly built at this stage and is test fitted in the place at the top part of the layout. Here we can see the point rodding being diving under the rails, and also some of the tiny details you don't always see, like point detectors, which were scratch built out of plastic. Also note the signal wire posts on the left. The gap in the middle right of the picture is where a ground signal would be placed. And here's, those that understand these things, but here's a view of the wiring underneath the boards, and it shows how the white shows up the wiring much clearer. Multiple D connectors were used at this stage, but recently we've actually got rid of all those multiple connectors with a single large D connector, which seems to make life a lot easier. And here's the control panel. The layout is run as DC, although we did plan to convert it to DCC at a later stage. The knobs, row of knobs along the middle, just control power to the sections. The lever frame is fully interlocked and controls the signals and turnouts, and was a mod track kit from Australia, which sadly is no longer available. And here's a general view of the finished result. This shows the different ballast and the point rodding in place. At this stage, the track still requires some weathering. And this shows the sweeping curve of the layout. It's actually a quadrant of a circle, and it's the two main running lines are on a smooth curve. And our hard work in getting the track base or the base of the boards nice and level shows up when the trains are running on the main lines, because they do run nice and smoothly, which is very satisfying. Right, now to start talking about some of the structures, and we'll start with the canal bridges. This is a picture by a club member of a railway bridge going over a canal. I'm not sure where the canal is, but this provided a basis for us to work on. And this is our model of the canal bridge. This is what we got to, and this is a Chris Neville photo. The way beams that support the track are made up as a brass frame of square and rectangular tube. The rectangular tube is covered in thin wood strip to form the way beams, and the track chairs were glued directly onto this. Part of the brass frame can be seen in this photo, in the just running along diagonally underneath the tracks. The second version of the bridge decking was built in situ, as the geometry is complex due to the curved track and the railway crossing the canal at an angle. This is mostly made up of evergreen plastic strip and sections. And this shows the detail of the underside of the bridge, which has all the brackets and rivets, but unfortunately cannot be easily seen from normal viewing distances. Four retaining walls were required, along with 8 capping stones. All of these were made up of hollow boxes glued together and covered in embossed styrene. And to support the canal bridge itself, the 2 support walls were required. These could be glued to one of the retaining walls prior to painting, and then slid under the track work. And here's a trial fit. The bridge would have to be built from the top down, but the trial fit showed that it would work. And here's a trial fit of the bridge after it's been painted. Note also that the canal sides have been almost finished by this stage. And to cover up all that lovely lattice work and rivets, we made some timber covers. This was just wooden timber strip and stained with creosote. And to weather it, some grey paint was just rubbed on that was nearly dry with a finger, but it turned out quite well. The Llangollen Canal that passes through Grindley Brook utilises many of these distinctive lift bridges. Many have been replaced by modern metal examples, but in and around the village of Wrenbury, there are 3 that have been renovated using wood as per the originals. A field trip was made to measure them up for a model. And here's the model. It's mostly made out of evergreen strip. Sometimes we had to combine strips to get the right size. So you can see just one of the diagonal braces there has got 2 by 7, so that's a 2 by 7 inches. Well, that had to be made up of several strips to get that size. And the model was made to work, although sadly the hinges broke at a later stage and it no longer does work. And here's some of the detail. Some of the real cast parts were replicated by suitably shaped plastic, like the upright at the top of the picture there. And a lot of use was made of grant line nuts, which can be seen underneath that horizontal beam. In the 1960s, the bridges were painted cream, so the model was painted Humboldt light stone to represent faded cream. The canal walls were made up of scribed das on plywood to represent the sandstone blocks originally used and that are still in situ on the real canal at the moment. And here's the finished bridge in situ with the addition of scenery by club member David Brocklehurst, who sadly has passed away earlier this year. When the real canal was rebuilt to accommodate the railway bridge, the banks were made from brick rather than stone. So brick embossed plastic sheet was used over a curved shape made from plastic strip. There's a bit of brute force involved with this to get it to conform to a curved shape by utilising a workmate. But the blend in the brickwork in the middle picture was made by slitting the bricks along the courses and just bending it and then filling in the gaps with das. The scenery along the canal, the dirty canal walls is represented by painted paper underneath the perspex sheet. The reeds are all hand cut from card and painted and then individually glued onto the perspex. And this is the finished canal scene. And to be honest with you, I think we're all quite pleased the way how it turned out. Right, now we'll talk about the road bridges. At each end of the layout, we've got a scenic break. At one end, we have a tunnel, and at the other end, by the station, we have a road bridge. The deck was made up of parts from an enhanced Accost kit in brass, but no longer available, and plastic sheeting with suitable rivets that are shown in white. You can also see that the bridge had to be lengthened slightly to allow for the wider track width spacing of the test track. You can see that by the white bits either end of the brass parts on the bridge decking. Underneath the bridge features the curved brick arches that are sadly not usually visible. Looking for prototype inspiration, a field trip was made on some bridges that I already knew about on the Great Central Line between Gerrards Cross and Sear Green. And so that sort of arrangement of the bridge was used as inspiration for the layout. And here's a similar view on the model with not enough depth of field, sadly, but it gives you some idea of what it looks like. To support the decking, the bridge deck rests on two supports. These are made up of a collection of hollow boxes to form yet another box. This was done for stability and also strength. You can see the holes that are drilled into the flat part to let the solvent fumes escape. These were then covered in plastic embossed brickwork from Southeastern Finecast. And a second attempt at the returning walls, that they are rotated and tilted back creates a complex shape, and that's why we required 2 goes at getting it right. And the bridge deck in place. You note that the parapets of the bridge are rebated into the pillars, and the coping stones are also made as from a hollow box. And there's a similar view on the prototype. Painted bricks on the model. The model was first sprayed with red primer and then painted with mortar colour, which is Humboldt 28, and then the excess wiped away. And then the bricks were painted by adding paint to a cloth wrapped around a finger, wiping most of the paint away, and then rubbing the cloth gently over the top of the brickwork. And so just to paint the bricks. This was done twice to get proper coverage, but in hindsight, it may have been better to leave it after just 1 coat with part of the red primer showing. And you can see that in this prototype picture, there's a slight reddish hue on a lot of the bricks, and that would have maybe perhaps been better to just left it after one coat. And it's a final view of the bridge prior to painting.
Okay, so now we'll start talking about some of the structures, and the first one is the goods shed. A mock-up of a modern LMS goods shed on the layout was made from cardboard. This was made up from a drawing in LMS architecture, but we found that the real one was too big for the layout, so we had to make it smaller. We started off by making the sides and ends of the structure all made from styrene. The roof structure, which is a piece of art in itself, the Belfast roof trusses are under construction here. Some RAF hangars use this principle as well. The finished roof sections for the taller part of the layout. This photo shows the carcass of the shed sitting on brick base. Just the roofs now to put in place. With the roof, one of the roofs in place, we did a trial fit into the layout. As we mentioned earlier, that all the buildings slot into spaces left in the baseboard, and that hides the unsightly gap you sometimes see between a building and the ground. Here we're showing making up of the drain pipes using Model U components. Rather than hide the finely modelled trusses, it was decided to show the roof under repair. Here we can see the carpenters repairing the roof whilst the goods shed staff member looks on. This shot shows an interior view. It shows the underneath of the roof and the interior wall. The central girder still requires a hoist, which we're looking for at the moment to add to the shed. Here's a view from the station end of the layout of the completed goods yard. Now we'll talk about the weighbridge huts. This is a photo of the prototype which we used to make the model from. And here's the model we made up from scratch of the weighbridge hut and the weighbridge in front of it. Inside the weighbridge hut, it features fully detailed scales and an office, but unfortunately these often can't be seen because we haven't put a light in the hut, which is a bit of an oversight. Now we talk a bit about the station area. Here we can see the ground frame with the shunter and also the shunter's bicycle. This was an excellent French brass kit, which we managed to buy from an exhibition in Paris. Unfortunately, the kit's no longer available.
Right, back to Brian again. We'll talk about the station area. Mock-ups were made of the station buildings and the various structures to get a feel for how they would look on the layout. The LNWR utilised wooden prefabricated station buildings that are very distinctive. Use of these buildings on the layout should shout LNWR and give the layout a sense of place. The Pico book LNWR portrait provided the plans. Jigs were made up to assist in building the individual panels. This ensured consistency. And here we can see piles of panels required for the two buildings that are on the layout. Panels are laid out to make sure enough are being built, because with all the different types, it's quite easy to forget what you need. This is the carcass of the smaller building. The style of windows all NNWR buildings from that time was quite distinctive. Note the fireplace inside the building, right in the middle of the photo. Here we're trying out slightly different designs of valance that we made, and this was a trial fit to show which looked the most effective. Notice the window detailing and the booking office window. At an early exhibition, we just had to make some temporary roofs to put on the buildings, as they were still under a work under progress. This is a trial fit of an earlier roof version, which ended up slightly curling at the ends, so had to be scrapped. And this is the final roof design, with construction with a much stronger longitudinal beams, and is made up of two parts. The top part, which is the ceiling, if you like, and the second part, which is the roof. And a bit of a jump, but here's the finished building, standing on a sub base, which is not normally seen because it drops down into the platform. The larger building is shown here with the roof under construction with the canopy. The placing of the chimneys and vents onto the ceiling dictated exactly where the holes for them needed to go in the roof. And this larger building is actually based on a real building that was at Armitage. Making up the valance. The valance was drawn out by a club member and laser cut by York Model Making. As making up the canopy structure, note that the support ribs to create a sloping canopy roof towards the gutters. The canopy is also curved to exactly match the curve on the platforms. You can just see it on the front part of the canopy. And here's the three main parts of the roof of the larger building laid out. And the three parts are all held together by a complicated array of hidden screws within the building. To do the actual window frames, we produced our own etch for the windows. 4 etchers were required. It wasn't cheap, but 3 of the etchers segments are bolted together to form a proper 3-dimensional window in which glass can be dropped into. And here we can see the larger building with the windows in place, although the interior still needs to be finished off. And this is a Chris Nevard picture, and this shows the 2 buildings in place on the layout, and they've turned out quite well. The footbridge was, here you can see the footbridge mock-up in place to show how it would affect the view. The station platforms were made up of individual slabs glued down, primed, and then individually painted. Several attempts to get the shades right that we wanted were made, and it took a few months to finish doing that. A club member produced a one-off etch to make up the footbridge to LNWR drawings in one of the books, along with other bits of brass angle, and it looks very nice. The treads for the walkway were made up of strip wood. And you can see a trial run of the finished footbridge. It was slightly twisted, and it can just be seen visibly at the bottom of the picture there. So it was gently coaxed back into position, so it did actually stand on the two, securely on the two platforms. There's a trial fit of all the cable yard components, the huts and the various staves, and the finished cable yard with suitable bits and bobs lying about. This shows some of the other bits and bobs that adorn the station with the notice boards under construction. And there's a couple of the notice boards in place on the front of the layout, along with an elderly couple looking that have just come back from a shopping trip to Whitchurch or Chester. Here's showing a trial fit of the signal box. This is an LNWR Type 5 design. Of wood rather than, quite often they were wood and brick, but this is all wood. And this shows part of the upper part of the lever frame slots under construction. This are the bits that would be visible within the signal box itself. And the signal box in situ on the layout. Notice the little asbestos hut in the bottom there. That was scratch built from drawings again in one of the books covering LMS architecture. And an overall view of the station area, shown with the buildings in place. We still got to weather the buildings, turn them down slightly, but as we haven't been able to get into our club room now for about 15 months, this will be one of the first jobs we'll be wanting to do.
Okay, it's back to me now. So now we'll talk about the tunnel end of the layout. This was the completed tunnel mouth, but you can see right through the tunnel, which kind of almost makes it into a bridge rather than a tunnel. So we needed to improve that and turn it into a real tunnel. Also note the cable channels and the permanent speed sign just before the entrance to the tunnel. So in order to make tunnels, which are actually off the layout, the tunnels were constructed at each end to hide the test track from view when looking off the layout. The sides were curved against a jig to match the curve of the test track boards and made from 2 layers of flexible MDF glued together to get the permanent curve, which you can see here in the photo. Each tunnel is made up of 2 sections. The sides of each section are held together by 4 inner frames made from wood. Then plastic inserts are added to the wood to prevent light coming through the tunnel. Here you can see a coach being used as a clearance test. The interior was painted black. This picture shows a completed tunnel with removable tops, just in case there's any derailments or stalls of locos inside the tunnel. Now you can see the full effect. It actually works. The bridge has now become a proper tunnel. You can no longer see daylight through the tunnel, nor the bridge at the other end.
Right, it's back to Brian again. So we'll talk a bit now about the scenery and how we constructed the scenery. The hillsides were built up in using polystyrene blocks and then covered with plaster bandages. You can see a surf form there as well that used to hack away at the polystyrene, and those that have never done it before, it does create a lot of mess. So building up the embankments around the road bridge, and you can see where it's been covered with plaster bandage. And on top of that, we mixed up some Artex with brown powder paint, and this was coated over the plaster bandage. The idea of adding brown powder paint is that if a bit gets chipped or what have you, it doesn't show up a revealing white plaster, it doesn't stand out so much. And this shows that the tunnel end, the bare hillside after it's been Artexed. On top of this, we laid some carpet underlay, and this was painted green as a base for further work. This was brushed up and then cut back, and brushed up and cut back. And then eventually, that gave an uneven surface, which you eventually then covered with static grass. One thing to point out are the nails hammered into the, to show where the boundary fence will go. There's a close-up view of the plate layers hut, but you can see the way the static grass has been used on top of the carpet underlay, although you can't see the carpet underlay so much now, but to just show the static grass in place. And a view of the finished canal area. The Weeping Willow to the right of the picture is actually an exact replica of one that stood out of a member's home. And if you went to his house, you could actually recognize his house if you'd seen the Weeping Willow on the layer, because it was exactly how it looked. He did a very good job there. And again, another view of that end of the layout. If you can see it, there's the fencing around the tunnel area is the standard LMWR type wooden fencing, and these are all handmade, scratch built, using a jig, and also the trees and what have you, all made by club members. A bit more scenic detail around the middle of the yard there is around where the lever frame is. And you can just make out in the background at the top right there, the vegetable patch. Unfortunately, we've taken lots of photographs of this layout, but the one thing we haven't taken any pictures of is the Shunter's vegetable patch. So I'll have to correct that. Adorning the layout are double ground signals and ground signals, and this shows a double ground signal under construction. And the various ground signals and components being painted prior to fixing them all together. And here we go, they've been constructed and they're ready to be dropped onto the servo units. And here we can see the servo units attached to the ground signals on a metal base plate, which can be just screwed onto the board from underneath. At the moment, although they can work, we actually haven't finished wiring them up to get them to work from the lever frame that we showed earlier on the control panel.
Okay, so now we've kind of got to the time when we wanted to build a lighting rig for the layout. Initially, we borrowed a lighting rig from another layout, which worked very well, but it didn't quite give us the effect we wanted. So the first thing after we designed it was to start making the individual parts. Here in this photo, you can see the legs for the lighting unit, which are being fitted to the back of the layout for the first time. They actually clip on to the legs of the baseboard. Here's the design for the lighting beams, which fixed to the top of the poles. 9 were required. The black outline on the left of the beams are laser cut steel plates. These are designed to hook up on to the bolts fixed at the top of the poles. Here you can see the beams now they've been made actually on top of the poles. The next thing to do was make a valance that goes right around the top of the layout. This is made from curved pelmet boards. I had to make 8 of these. Here's a trial fitting of the pelmets. These are held in position on the beams by metal pins. Here's Colin looking rather worried that it's not going to fit, but in fact it did. So here's the pelmets all in place before they've been painted. They overhang the layout by 3 inches to bring the lighting slightly forward of the layout. This photo also shows how the lighting poles fix to the baseboard legs rather than the baseboards themselves. And here's a photo of the lighting switched on for the very first time. 2 fluorescent strip lights are used per board. 1 daylight strip with 1 cool white strip nearest to the front. This gives us the shade of lighting that we were after. Here's a picture at an exhibition showing the rear of the lighting. The poles and the cross beams at the top have all been painted sky blue so they don't stand out so much. And this photo shows the pelmet boards all painted brown to match the fire-resistant brown curtain. This photo was taken at the NEC for the Worley show, which we attended about 3 years ago. Right, so now we've made all these individual parts. They all need protecting when we transport them in the van to various exhibitions around the country, because they're actually quite delicate. And so we needed to make some transport boards for the pelmets for a start. There was 8 pelmets, 4 pelmets per board. So that was 2 boxes were needed. Then we had to make boxes for the fluorescent tubes. A box was built around the tube cluster made using a jig. There's space for 10 tubes. We actually use 8 for the layout and carry 2 spares. That means 2 boxes were made, 1 for cool white and 1 for the daylight tubes. This shows one of the completed boxes with the lockable lids so that the tubes don't fall out. Then we had to make 2 boxes for transporting the lighting battens. Each batten holds 2 fluorescent tubes.
Right, it's back to Brian, and we'll just talk briefly about the storage and how we transport the layout. This is the a picture of the club storage in the church hall where we meet. The amount of storage available dictated the size of the layout because we could only store so much. And the layout, the scenic part of the layout is stored in towers that are on trolleys that could be easily wheeled in and out of the store cupboard, and also onto tail lifts of vans when we go to exhibitions. However, the towers as originally built were designed to get through the storage cupboard with just millimetres to spare, but we soon found out they wouldn't fit through the Luton van door, so we had to reduce them in height, and that can be shown on the tower on the left, which is slightly shorter than the tower on the right. And here we see all the 8 scenic boards in the 2 towers after they've all been reduced in height. The towers were made in 2 sections so that if necessary we could split them for ease of transport. Before we reduced them in height, we had to do this inside the van, to get them in and out. So it used to be quite cumbersome with the van rocking from side to side, the bottom part of the towers moving on the trolley wheels. So we were very much incentivized to reduce the height of the van, the height of the towers to get in the van. And here we see the towers just being assembled, and you can see the a bottom metal frame with the wheels on. And here's your typical Luton box van, which is only just large enough to get the layout in. They all come with slightly different bodies and roller door heights, so we have to book a specific type of van to make sure we get the right height for the towers in through the door. There's only a matter of millimeters clearance, so we cannot reduce the towers any further because of the scenery. The stock is usually transported separately in cars by the owners. And in this picture, we can see the van fill up. After filling up the area above the cab, the towers are wheeled in and then secured in place, followed by the fiddle yard boards. And then everything else is put in: the legs, the lighting boxes, backboards, transformers, controllers, tools, ladder, and all, etc. And it just all fits into the van. It has taken us a few exhibitions to get the routine going, but I think we've hit it okay now. At an exhibition, it takes roughly about 3 to 5, well, about 5 hours to get everything set up with all the stock on. Although we can take the layout down nowadays in about 2 to 2.5 hours. And just finally, some pictures that Chris Neville took of the layout. So here we see the finished layout with the Britannia coming through underneath the road bridge at the station end of the layout. And a view from down the length of the platform with an Ivet mixed traffic 4MT coming through. You can also see the offset signal there, which is correctly set for the train coming through. The signals actually all do work apart from the ground signals, but we're working on that, getting those working. And finally, a War Department 280. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to access the layout for the last 15 months because of COVID, which has been frustrating, but there's still quite a few jobs that still need to be done. Anyway, we do hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and if you've got any questions, please ask. Thank you.
Okay, so that ends our presentation. So if anyone has any questions, we'd be pleased to answer.
Peter, and thanks very much indeed for that presentation. It was absolutely excellent, absolutely interesting, and I think I learned a lot myself on how to do different things. So it really does help and benefit all of us as modelers to see how things are being done. So if anybody's got any questions, if they'd like to either raise their hand, unmute themselves, or put a question in the chat box, then you please ask the questions or raise any points that you've got, and Peter will be happy to answer them. Yeah. There's one question I would like to. Oh, James, sorry, you were going to say something?
No, carry on, Rob.
Sorry, one question I was going to ask. The amount of polystyrene, or sorry, styrene sheet that you have used seems a tremendous amount. Was is it planned, or were there any other light materials that you could have used?
I think we just, I remember going down to Wicks and just buying, I think it's just a couple. I didn't need that many really. Just a couple of big slabs of polystyrene. I think that they use it for inserts into cavity walls.
Right.
We also like cheap as well. We also ask club members to bring any styrene sheets from packing boxes and things like that, which
Right.
might be smaller, but the total amount wasn't actually that much. But I think we still got some left in the storerooms that we could use. But
So that must have been quite an expensive layout to build, looking at the amount of wood you've used.
Yeah, I dread to think how much it's probably running into several thousands now. You have to bear in mind that I mean, it's taken quite a long time. We only meet for about 2.5 hours a week, and we do get the occasional working Saturday. So a lot of the stuff is done in members' homes. But yeah, the wood, we buy the wood from a local proper timber merchant. So you do get the plywood and what have you. Some of the expensive items like the Modatrek lever frame was a few £100. I think to get the those plates laser etched for the lighting cost about £250, something like that off the top of my head. So I dread to think what the costs are, but I should imagine it's coming like £5,000 or £6,000. But that just ignores the labour. The labour is probably astronomical.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so
it's not something you can count the cost of labour. We had a budget of around £5,000 for building Oakhampton in just materials, and about 1,000 of that was just track components.
Yeah, you don't appreciate how much these things cost until you go out and start buying them in bulk.
Yeah, I would emphasise that we didn't skimp on any costs. For example, the plywood we used was always birch ply,
right.
which we've always found is far better to work with than the ordinary ply you get from places like B&Q.
Yeah.
So we've always been willing to spend a bit more money to get the right components.
I certainly think the birch ply is worth its weight in gold as a modelling material, purely for the stability that you get with it and the accuracy.
Yeah.
When you also consider that you spent 5 or 6 grand spread over 15 years, that's that's very manageable.
Oh yeah, I mean, we haven't sort of really had to dip into club funds to get it. It's been sort of financed out of income, if you like, over that period. And also, a lot of club members will donate bits, so they'll build something small and not ask to be charged for it. So not everything's costed in.
Yeah, the cost of, for example, the cost of getting those 2 little bicycles, which we bought at a Paris model railway show. We didn't add the cost of the tickets to get to Paris.
They should have put them down on expenses.
Yeah, maybe on hindsight, maybe.
Yeah. First class on Eurostar. Yeah. It's also worth pointing out a lot of effort was made to get things right. So on the station buildings, the planking part of the panels is evergreen sheet. I think from memory it's 188,000 spacing, but you can't normally buy that in the UK. So I was going to a model shop that was in Slough that deals, you can order stuff from the Walters catalogue from America. And so I went down there and they ordered from the Walters catalogue these large sheets. I think they're 2 foot by 1 foot sheets of styrene. And we only I had to buy 4 sheets because they come in packets of 4. But you only actually use 1 sheet for both station buildings. But it is virtually the right size for the prototype.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that although the building of the layouts has cost quite a bit, it's quite small in comparison with the cost of all the stock that we've got.
Oh, absolutely.
We can hold 16 trains on the current fiddle yard, but we do have plans to widen the fiddle yard, so we will be able to run an extra 4 trains, 2 on each new siding.
Right.
And that still, in fact, won't be enough to run all the stock that all the club members have got. Because over the years, while we've been building the layout, club members have been busy also building wagons and coaches, parcel vans and things like this, and locos. So building the layout is just half the job, really.
When you're at an exhibition, do you restrict your running to LMS and BR stock or locos particularly, or do you allow other regions to be represented?
I'll answer this one. The layout is set around 1960, so we try and keep stock relevant to around 1960. So there wouldn't be LMS livery stock there, but we do occasionally allow the odd interloper. But it's usually somebody who's got their favourite loco they want to run. But I think there's not very much information on that line, but I think I did read somewhere in a article in Backtrack that a Great Western 280 was scheduled on a coal train or something to run through there. So you could legitimately run some Great Western locos. And I think obviously if we ignore the fact that the line had been closed, and we run diesels as well. So it's a bit of an artistic license or modeller's license.
Yeah, right, thanks. Are there any other questions?
How many members do you have who contribute stock towards the layout?
There's a core of about 5 or 6 members that produce most of the stock, and even within that core there's 2 that produce the vast majority. We've actually got the stock for running at exhibitions on a spreadsheet, because we were finding that some people just plonked everything on and hogged the layers, if you like. Yeah. So we've evened it out now, and there's a spreadsheet. Everybody's given a list of what stock they've got to bring and on what train it goes on. And this makes setting up at a layout much easier, because before everybody was just getting in each other's way and asking, where's this going and what have you. So everybody knows exactly where it goes, and we can actually get stock on much quicker. And it's also helped that we're starting to use, as it were, more like trays for holding the stock. So rather than putting them in individual boxes, if you put them in the trays, you can get them out and put them on the layout much quicker.
So the stock actually travels in the van along with the layout?
Very little of it. Most of it goes in members' cars.
Okay, so you give them the trays and then they load them up?
Yeah, the trays belong to the members themselves.
Okay.
But we just, somebody had the idea and they said, well, that looks good. And it's just sort of expanded from there.
Yeah.
I would add for exhibitions, we normally have a team of 8 people, 8 club members. We can, at a pinch, run it with maybe 6 or 7, but it's very hard work over a long weekend.
Right.
So we always prefer to have a full complement of 8 club members.
How many do you have operating at a time?
Normally 5.
5, right. So 5 on, 3 off, and you rotate round.
Yeah.
Mm.
How many of those 8 are all those 8 O-gauge members? It doesn't sound as if they are.
Not all of them, no. There's 1 or 2 00 guys that come in and help out, but they like going to the exhibition, and also there's one member in particular like shunting, so he's quite happy to be at the front of the layout, front of the yard, and we leave him to it.
Yeah, we have managed to infect those 00 gauge people with O gauge, so they've started to buy some O gauge stock now as well.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing in our club. Aren't I, Tim?
No,
Maybe.
Right. Well, are there any? Has anybody else got any questions for Peter? And so, if they would like to do so, unmute. Even actually show themselves on screen by opening their videos. If not, then see. Oh, yeah, it looks as though it's all the club members showing themselves, showing their faces. Come on, Jennifer. Right. In that case, Peter, look, it seems that nobody's got any more questions. Thank you very much indeed for the work and the effort that you've put into a producing the layout, and B, for producing the session that we have just seen. Very interesting. I said, learned a lot of it, and I've got a sneaky suspicion that I might come back and have a look at it when we found it back up on YouTube at the end of once the show's sorted out and finished, because I think there are one or two things there I would like to have another look at what you've done. So many thanks indeed for your time and for your effort. It's been well worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Right. I'm going to close down the meeting now.
Okay.